The progress of this agreement is a reassuring example of regionalism at work and how a united France can lend power to a cause fairly easily. Another example is the Niue Treaty, which is an agreement on cooperation between FFA members about monitoring, control, and surveillance of fishing. This was established under the auspices of UNCLOS, and the purpose was to carry out the concept of regional cooperation a step further by establishing a framework which would enhance the ability of Pacific Island states. The Niue Treaty is a fine example of regional agreement, which is considered a success because it spares island states, and in particular smaller island states where I'm from, administration costs of having to negotiate many bilateral agreements in the combat of IUU. Okay, I'll just jump to my conclusion then. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on, but unfortunately, I have to conclude, for time is against me. The affirmative team says that regionalism has failed, but I can only ask that you look around this room and tell yourself if this statement is really true. If it were not for regionalism that brought us all here today, then I wonder what did. Go back to that mental picture of the Pacific Ocean earlier and think whether any of this would have been achieved if one country was to stand on its own. I think not. No doubt, success is easily achieved and is a slow process, but regionalism is not just about successes and failures. It is about each and every one of us in the spirit of the Pacific way coming together and working towards a common goal. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just as a small rebuttal to the tuna argument, and in relation to my point on climate change, when global warming occurs, the temperature of the sea starts to rise. So not only are you going to have to worry about the protection of your fish against other fishermen, but you'll also worry about the fact that tuna swim away to colder oceans once the temperature rises in their habitat. Now, moving on to my point to do with regionalism, has failed in the Pacific in terms of climate change. Hopefully our friend and colleague Afrin, who is sitting in the crowd from the beautiful islands of Tuvalu, will agree with my team on this point, according to the following reasons. The Pacific Islands Framework for Action Against Climate Change, 2005, that was enforced in 2005, and the framework has 6 principles. The first one is to implement adaptation measures, implement adaptation measures, governance and decision making, improving understanding of climate change, education, training and awareness, contributing to global greenhouse gas reduction, and also the partnerships and cooperation. Under the last goal of the Pacific Island Framework for Action Against Climate Change, the partnerships and cooperation, our island countries will continue to advocate for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. One of the expected outcomes of the framework by 2015 is to promote significant international support through advocacy for further reduction in greenhouse gases. This was also stated in the Niue Declaration on Climate Change as a significant principle of that declaration. However, that target of reducing the greenhouse emissions was not achieved. In December 2009, 194 countries attended the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Copenhagen. The Prime Minister of Tuvalu was there, amongst those other Pacific Island leaders, and he demanded that there would be a legally binding agreement to aim for a target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Even at 1.5 degrees, it is deeply going to influence Tuvalu's island as the sea level rises. And it is such a disappointment to know that our countries walked away from that with nothing, no legally binding agreement at all. So I'm sorry, Efren, but if they don't go according to the reductions that they agreed upon but aren't legally binding, then you have no remedy. The benefits from regional cooperation can only be obtained and offset its costs if decisions reached are actually implemented. So we need to, these decisions that our island countries have made, they need to be implemented, because right now they're not. So the bottom line result of Copenhagen is just that we've walked away with nothing. In relation to the Pacific Islands framework for action on climate change, in June this year, the Pacific Island Regional Environmental Program issued a midterm review of the Pacific Islands framework for action against climate change. And this review looked at different parts of the framework and pointed out certain gaps that exist in that framework and why it isn't helping our region. And those gaps include ecosystem-based approaches, adaptation technology, links with mitigation with the greenhouse gases, and disaster risk management and community-based approaches. The impact of that framework, as mentioned on page 3 of the review, has been far less desirable and considerably less than its potential. The framework has not been utilized during the project planning and related discussions in our island countries. The actions that our islands are taking on a national and regional level to address climate change are more in connection with national priorities and strategic plans of regional and international agencies. And these may be in accordance with the principles that I had mentioned about the framework, but they do not actually contribute to the framework's action plan. As mentioned, Tuvalu is just one example of climate change in the region. A small island country with a population of 11,600 people. How has regionalism helped this country? Tuvalu attended the convention in Copenhagen and fought for its country's survival, calling on the large developing nations to take on a legally binding agreement to slash carbon dioxide emissions. The nation of Tuvalu has been aware of their situation since the 1980s, when scientists first visited the country and predicted that someday the entire country would drown. The government continues to run occasional workshops to educate citizens on the predicted impacts of global warming and how it will affect them. So, as a conclusion, I would just like to leave you all with this point. It may just be a discussion for today, but honestly, for Tuvalu, it's serious. And what we are saying today is that regionalism has failed in the Pacific in terms of climate change, because these frameworks that have been implemented, nothing has come from them. We've walked out with nothing, and that's the end of the story. And I'm sorry, Efren.
Copenhagen and Tuvalu. There's a really sad story to tell. However, are we going to dwell on just that one action that was taking place? Copenhagen in 2009. It's unfortunate, but then there were 3 splits. One, Tuvalu pushed for a binding agreement. Second one, part of the Pacific Islands just sit there, didn't make any decision. And the other part of the Pacific Island didn't agree. However, it is to our advantage, in a way. But that doesn't mean that regionalism failed. It's just in that one occasion they didn't agree. One of the advantages is because now countries in the regions are more aware of the issues of climate change. Copenhagen is just an accord. It was not a binding protocol.